Hello, everyone, and very good morning to all of you. Today, we're pleased to have you join the 4th edition of India Autism at Work Summit. This year's summit is brought to you by SAP Thomson Reuters, J.P.Morgan, and Brainpreneurs. I'm Archana from SAP, and I'll be your moderator for the day. Before we start the program, we know we have audience from different countries today, and we respect different terminology used to address the person in spectrum. So please excuse us for this. Today in the workplace, promoting neurodiversity program can often be overlooked due to the perception that additional effort is required to build and sustain these initiatives. Additionally, in India especially, many young people on the autism spectrum drop out from the mainstream school around the age of 12, as the education system is unable to provide a tailored support and development for neurodiverse children. As a result, this can lead to limitation in further career and employment opportunity. Our object for today is to get this ball rolling. Let's talk about the folks on the spectrum, neurodiverse talent in the corporate workplace, and how we can co-create an environment that can support and nurture for people who are on the spectrum. Before we start, let me run through the agenda for today. So we start off the session with the keynote by Amy Gravino, followed by experience sharing by Thomson Reuters, Brainpreneurs, J.P.Morgan, and SAP. After that, we will listen to our speaker, Gopika Kapoor, and wrap the summit with an interesting conversation with Pranav Bakshi. I'm excited to introduce to you Amy Gravino, our keynote speaker. Amy is an autism sexuality advocate and relationship coach in the Center for Adult Autism Services at Rutgers University. And today she will speak to us about her journey and introduce us to a topic not too widely discussed. Without further ado, let me hand it over to Amy. Amy, welcome, and thank you so much for being with us today. Over to you, Amy.
Thank you, Archana. Thank you so much. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Okay. So good morning, everyone. I'm so pleased to be here today at the 4th Annual India Autism at Work Summit. Thank you so much for having me. As Archana said, this is a bit of an unusual topic, but I'm of the opinion that this connects to everything that autistic people do, be it in work, be it in life. So I think that it is so important for us to have conversations about autism and sexuality for that very reason. So this is Sexuality and the Spectrum, Lessons on Sex, Dating, and Love Autism Style. So I'll give you just a little overview of what I'm going to cover in my keynote today. I'll give you a brief introduction. I'll talk about the idea of intimacy. What is intimacy? What are the different kinds of intimacy? And what are some of the barriers that autistic people face to creating intimacy, which is not just romantic or sexual as we might think of. The intimacy actually comes in many different forms. I'll also be talking about a lot of the misconceptions that exist around autism and relationships, which ultimately contribute to the stigma that many autistic people face in getting sex education and accurate and comprehensive information about sexuality education, as well as establishing those intimate bonds that I mentioned. And I'll also talk about why it's so important ultimately for us to have these conversations. Then I'll share with you the firsthand perspective of a woman on the spectrum, which is me. I'll be telling you a bit of my story and some of the experiences I've had with dating and relationships and what that's been like for me. And then I'll just have a few strategies, both for parents and professionals, for how you can have conversations with your child or client about autism and sexuality. And then we'll have time for questions. So I'm going to try to stay on time as much as I possibly can. And here we go. So very quickly, I know I can't see anybody's hands, but who do you talk to about sex and dating? Do you talk to your family? Maybe not a lot of people talk to their family. Maybe some do, a sibling who you might be close with, or a cousin. Probably not your parents. Most people don't talk about dating with their parents. Do you talk about it with a therapist or a counselor? I'm from New York. Everybody has a therapist. So I think a lot of people talk about relationships and dating with their therapist. That's not too uncommon. What about a religious leader? Do you talk about sex and dating with a priest? Maybe not. Some people do that kind of counseling. Some don't. Probably most people don't. What about your friends? Do you talk about sex and dating with your friends? Now, most people, when I give this presentation in person, they raise their hands here. because this is who most people talk to about sex and dating, is their friends. Or do you not have anyone to talk to about sex and dating, or do you not feel comfortable talking about it? Now, I gave this presentation a couple of years ago at a college here in the United States and there was a class of students on the spectrum, and pretty much all of them raised their hand for this last one. Overwhelmingly, many individuals with autism do not have anyone to talk to about sex and dating and relationships. And this is such a big part of the human experience and such a big part of humanity. And imagine not having anybody to talk to about it because of the stigmas that exist around autism and sexuality, because of the misconceptions. It's a big, big problem. And so if you don't have anyone to talk to about these things, it's going to leave you left out of a whole lot of what it means to be human and to be in our society. So what is intimacy? Well, at its core, intimacy is a connection. It's a connection between two people, maybe more people. But it's not just romantic or sexual. A lot of times when we hear the word intimacy and when we talk about sex education, people think we only mean the actual physical act of sexual intercourse. But it's so much more than that. Intimacy is something we established long before we're ever thinking about going to bed with somebody. So one type of intimacy is emotional intimacy, and that can be candid, authentic sharing of thoughts and feelings. That's emotional intimacy, right? What about intellectual intimacy? What's that? Comfort with communicating beliefs and viewpoints without worrying about potential conflicts. That's intellectual intimacy, right? Again, we might not think about it in these terms. We're so used to thinking about intimacy as something that's romantic or sexual, but this is a form of intimacy. This is a form of sharing with others. And we do this, whether it's with friends, whether it's with colleagues at work, no matter where it might be, we are establishing this intimacy with people. And the last form is experiential. So the act of teamwork and moving in unison toward a common goal while creating an experience. That's a form of intimacy. This is what we often find in the workplace. This is what people do with colleagues, with coworkers. You are, when you are working together with people, engaging in an act of intimacy. It is a connection you're creating with the people around you. And for so many people on the spectrum, that intimacy is inaccessible or very difficult to establish for a variety of reasons. And it causes so many problems. So what are some of the barriers to intimacy for autistic people? Well, at the core, I think one of those barriers is that neurotypical society, non-autistic society, doesn't understand what autism really is. And that lack of understanding allows incorrect ideas to perpetuate, allows people to fear autism and to fear those who are different and who are autistic, and to treat people who are autistic as the other. Right? We all fear the other, the thing we don't know, the thing we don't understand. And as a result, people become isolated and they're not able to create those intimate connections that we need so desperately. Another barrier, as I said, is lack of education and support for individuals with autism in this area. There has been starting to be some changes here in the US. There are starting to be some sex ed curricula that have been created for adults on the spectrum, individuals on the spectrum, but they're still nowhere near what we need in terms of research, in terms of a comprehensive curriculum and a consistent curriculum, because there isn't. In the US, there's no consistent sex ed curriculum from state to state, and they're not even all required to be medically accurate. So there's no regulation of what information autistic individuals are receiving, if they're receiving any at all. So that lack of education and support is a huge barrier to creating intimacy for people on the spectrum. And then another barrier, and this is only a few, there are, I think, quite a few barriers, but another is that we don't always recognize that intimacy might look different for people on the spectrum, right? So we tend to look for things like eye contact and ways that neurotypical people show that they feel intimate and connected with someone. And autistic people may not display those feelings in the same way, but it doesn't mean that we don't feel them. It doesn't mean we don't feel an intimate connection with somebody, just because the presentation of those emotions is different. So that lack of recognition then lets the idea perpetuate that autistic people can't engage in intimacy or are not feeling connected to others, when it's simply not true. It's just wrong. It's a wrong assumption. So there are a lot of misconceptions, as I said, out there around autism and relationships, and that contributes to those barriers that I just mentioned. One of them, is that autistic people are asexual or don't have sex. We tend to very often look at autistic people as children in big bodies, and that's not true. That's not fair. Autistic adults are adults. We may have challenges, we may have things that we need support and help with, but it doesn't mean that we are all asexual. There are certainly people who identify that way, and that's okay. But autistic people do have sex. We have good sex, we have bad sex, we have mediocre sex, everything in between. But it's simply an unfair stereotype to say that all autistic people are not interested in sex or relationships. Another myth, individuals on the spectrum are all straight. When there have been discussions about autism and sexuality, it's often from a very heteronormative perspective. But what has been found in actuality is that there are more folks on the spectrum who identify as LGBTQ than in the general population. So autism and sexuality, whatever orientations and gender identities you will find in the neurotypical community, you'll find with autistic people too. Another misconception, that autistic people can only date other autistic people. I don't know if any of you are familiar at all with the program Love on the Spectrum. It was aired in Australia originally, and it's been on Netflix in the US. And all of the couples they showed, all of the dates they put people on in the show, it was all autistic people with other autistic people or with someone with another disability or diagnosis. There were no mixed neurology couples, which I thought was kind of strange because autistic people can date all kinds of people. Some autistic people prefer to date those who share their diagnosis, who they have that in common with. Some do prefer to date others with other mental health diagnoses. And some autistic people date neurotypical people. It's, you know, autistic guys tend to drive me a little bit crazy, but men in general drive me crazy. So what's the difference? But we can date all different kinds of people. And then another myth, dating an autistic guy is exactly the same as dating an autistic girl. Again, this is from our tendency to paint people with autism with one broad brush, but we are all different. It sounds very simple, but a lot of people don't realize that not all autistic people are the same. And certainly women on the spectrum have a whole different set of challenges and issues that we face that are different to men. And I'm glad you'll be hearing that other perspective today as well later on. So we're all different. We're all different. Another myth, and I heard this recently at a conference that I gave, that autistic people do not feel rejection the same way that neurotypicals do. Simply not true. This goes back to what I said before about how we display certain emotions may not be the way that neurotypicals do, but rejection hurts no matter who you are. I remember all of the rejections that I have felt, and they have stayed with me. And when I remember them, I remember not just what happened, but how I felt when it happened. And those are a part of who I am. So yes, we absolutely do feel rejection as neurotypicals do. And the last myth, and this one hurts me the most, is that individuals with autism cannot love. And again, this and the previous one kind of are outgrowths of the diagnostic criteria we use to diagnose autism that says that people with autism don't display empathy or lack empathy. And it's simply not true. I think rather than nothing getting in, it's the fact that everything gets in. We take in all the information and we can't filter it. And then we shut down as a consequence. But we are absolutely full of love to give. We have so much love. It's just a matter of finding someone who will respect and honor that love and treat us the way we deserve to be treated. That is, quite frankly, the bigger problem. Oh yes, thank you for the mention of a good doctor. I am not a huge fan of a good doctor either. Again, that's presenting, you know, the savant idea, and it's another male who's white. So it's still kind of a stereotypical portrayal, but we're trying to get there. We're trying to get better with our depictions of autism in the media. And actually, I've talked to the producers of Love on the Spectrum about the US version they're trying to do of the show. And I've expressed interest in potentially being a coach on the show as an autistic person and someone who may know where the participants are coming from. So that would be a really great thing if I was able to take part in that. So we'll see what happens with that. So why is it so important then? Why is it so important for us to talk about autism and sexuality? Well, as we've seen with everything I've just said, communication is absolutely key. Communication is a huge part of autism and of sexuality and of intimacy. And if you have challenges with communication, with understanding nonverbal cues and body language, and just being able to communicate with someone over, or having someone understand your communication, you're going to be shut out of so much of this part of the human experience. But it's also important because sexuality isn't assumed to be part of the human experience for folks on the spectrum. As I said, Also, oftentimes when I've attended, conferences and things, it's always the same areas that are kind of hit on, which is housing, employment, and recreation. But I've not often heard people talking about relationships and how do we help autistic people establish relationships, whatever those relationships might be, friendships, romantic relationships, whatever it might be. And it's also important because the consequences of not providing accurate, comprehensive sex ed are much too great. There are so many folks on the spectrum who end up in the criminal justice system because of engaging in behaviors that would be considered illegal, such as stalking, not realizing that they were engaging in stalking, and the law doesn't distinguish. The law doesn't care. If you have autism, you break the law, you'll go to jail. And many people end up as sex offenders when they shouldn't be, because of not having education and information. So, and many people also on the spectrum end up becoming victims of abuse. There's such a horribly high rate of abuse against people on the spectrum, be it sexual, be it emotional, financial, whatever it might be. And so we need to give people information so that they can be safe. That's so crucially important. And the final reason it's important is because, as somebody much smarter than me once said, sex begins long before sex begins. Like I said, intimacy is something you create with another human being long before you're ever thinking of going into bed with them. So those are just some of the reasons why it's so important for us to have conversations about autism and sexuality. So what better way then to kind of understand some of the unique, but not so unique, because I think neurotypicals go through a lot of these things too, but the experiences of someone on the spectrum by hearing from someone on the spectrum. So Archana already shared some of this when she introduced me. I won't go through all of it, but these are just some of the things that I have been up to, the boards I serve on. I currently work at Rutgers. I've given a TED Talk on autism and sexuality. If you go to YouTube, type Amy Gravino TED Talk, it'll come right up. And I'm currently writing my first book, which is called The Naughty Autie, which is a memoir of my experiences with dating as a woman on the spectrum. But back in 1996, long before all of that, I was 13 years old, and I was beginning to go through puberty like any other 13-year-old and having the same desires and the same questions and curiosities as anybody else. And I was starting to have crushes on the preferred sex of my choice, which was guys. And they're all very white, but so am I apologize. So you might wonder why Davy Jones is down here in the right-hand corner from the band The Monkees. I found the Monkees on TV when I was 13, and it did wonders for my popularity, having pictures of a band that was popular 30 years earlier taped to my locker. That's sarcasm. It didn't do wonders for my popularity at all. I was picked on for that. But Davy was the one that I developed the crush on, so that's why he's here. So even though I was beginning to go through the same physical, biological changes as my peers, I didn't have my first kiss till I was 17. So 12, 13 years old, starting to go through puberty, starting to have these curiosities and questions, no experience till I was 17. That's a big gap. There was a big disconnect between the things I had curiosities about, the things I was interested in, and learning opportunities that I had to explore it. Boys were not kissing me under the bleachers at school. They were too busy calling me ugly and not going anywhere near me with a 10-foot pole. So I didn't have those learning opportunities that my peers did. And when I began to go through puberty, I remember that feeling of disconnect, continuing and being augmented. I often compare the way I felt about my body to a balloon barely tethered to the earth, which you're seeing here in this picture. That was how I felt about my body, that it didn't belong to me, that it wasn't mine, because my self-esteem was so low from the bullying I was experiencing. I was suicidal from the age of 10. I was diagnosed, by the way, on the spectrum at the age of 11, I should add. And it was around that time when I came home from school and said to my mom, I feel like killing myself. And that's what made her go and look for help. And so puberty hitting again around that time, everything was, I was a crazy hormonal time bomb like any other teenager. And I think there was a lot of misunderstanding about how puberty affected me. We tend to do this thing with teenagers on the spectrum where we think that if they're not talking about what they're going through, that they're not going through it. But we don't do that with neurotypical teenagers. If a neurotypical 15-year-old doesn't want to talk about, something that is on their mind, we think, oh, he just doesn't want to talk about it. But if an autistic 15-year-old doesn't want to talk about something, we think, oh, he's fine. Why? I don't know why we do that. It's a strange assumption that we placed on autistic individuals. And so we tend to think that, again, that kind of atypical display of emotion means that we're not experiencing those emotions the same way that neurotypicals do. And it's simply not true. We are just processing our emotions in a different way. So because of all of the things that I was dealing with, the bullying that I mentioned and fighting with the school and trying to get services, my parents and I never had kind of the talk. You know, you often see this in the movies, like, let's sit down and have the big talk about sex. But to me, sex should not be one talk. Sex is many conversations, not just one conversation. So I don't think it was so much that they didn't want to talk to me about it, but just that we just were not able to do so because of everything else that was happening. But consequently, because of that, I wound up kind of learning about sex from the two worst places you can, which is from my peers and online. They often say that men watch their porn and women read their porn, and that was certainly true for me. I read a lot of fiction voraciously, and I began writing it as well to kind of, it was my way of exploring my sexuality because I had no other outlet to do so. And I found these friendships online. And I would go into this chat room for the Backstreet Boys. I'm dating myself horribly here, but you know when this was. And I became the kind of writer for our little group of friends. They'd say, write me a story with AJ, and I'd write them a little story as far as my 15-year-old imagination could stretch, which was pretty far, to be fair, given that I was 15 and hadn't even kissed a boy, and here I am writing about threesomes. I don't know how that works, but it worked. So, but what I didn't realize was that I was very, very vulnerable. Because even though the internet was different, you know, back then we didn't have TikTok and Snapchat and all the and Twitch and all the things that exist now, but there were chat rooms and there were predators. And a man came in the chat room one day and said that he was AJ from the Backstreet Boys, and I believed him. I didn't have any reason to not believe he was who he said he was. And it turned out that my parents actually hired a private investigator to look into him, which I didn't know at the time. And he was some guy who lived in Michigan, in the Midwest of the United States. I lived in New York. I'm born and raised in Long Island, New York, on the East Coast. So I don't know who he really was. You know, he sent me a ring, a fake diamond ring, and a typed letter, and he really preyed on me. Even though, thank God, nothing worse happened, he did kind of prey on me and take advantage of my vulnerability and my desire for validation and to be approved and to be told that it was okay to be who I was. Because everything that I was being told by the world around me was that it was not okay to be who I was. And there was no truer example of this than the experiences that I had in my day-to-day real life world. So when I was 15 years old, a boy moved in across the street from our house, and he had the cutest freckles in the world and a bowl haircut that put Julius Caesar to shame. And I developed a big old crush on him. And because, again, as I talked about earlier, the idea of intimacy, I didn't know how to establish that intimacy with him, emotional intimacy. I didn't understand how to do that. I would compensate with physical intimacy. So he'd be at the computer. Oh, Amy, I want to show you something. And I'd come over. Oh, okay. What is it? And I'd be right on top of him in his personal bubble, making him very, very angry and not knowing that I was making him angry. And he stopped talking to me. And every time I'd see him across the street, I would wave and he would glare. And about 50, 100 waves and glares later, I finally got the message. As I mentioned earlier, I didn't have my first kiss till I was 17. And so that was actually in an ice skating rink during a game of Truth or Dare, as you do. And I kissed this boy and again developed a big crush on him. And I remember calling his home one day and his mother answered the phone. What are you doing? How dare you call here? Don't you ever call here again. Bang, she hung up the phone. And no one could explain to me why this woman was so angry that a 17-year-old girl was calling her 14-year-old son. Nobody could explain to me why that was not okay. Perhaps emotionally, developmentally, I was closer to where he was than where my own peers were. I've always, and you may find this with the autistic people you know, I've always gotten along better with those who are younger than I am or who are older, never the kids my own age. Can't do it. Don't know why. But so I liked him very much and I never saw him again, you know, because we didn't go to the same school. So I never even got to see him kind of after that. And then, of course, there was my senior prom. And again, I was raised on the healthy diet of those Hollywood teen movies that, you know, the prom is the one perfect moment and everything will be magical. And I had a crush on a boy the whole year and he was a junior. And the only way the juniors go to the senior prom is with a senior. So I asked him and he said yes. And he was friends with the seniors. I wasn't. And so we went and we did, a few obligatory slow dances, but then the rest of the night he was on the dance floor dancing with other girls, and I was writing poetry on scraps of paper at the table. So I didn't get my perfect high school moment that I had wanted so badly and thought was going to finally happen. And it was just another in a long line of disappointments. But finally in college, go off to university, and I have my first boyfriend. Hallelujah! It's a miracle. That's all I've ever wanted. And I call him now my starter boyfriend because I had no clue what I was doing. I kind of tried to play the part of a girlfriend rather than I was being myself, but I didn't know how to be in a relationship because I'd never done that before. So I thought, well, what does a girlfriend do? I have to laugh at his jokes, even if they're not funny. I have to be nice to his parents. I have to go where he wants to go. It was like a mental checklist that I was kind of trying to make for myself, because I just didn't know how to be in a relationship. So there was that kind of disconnect between, again, what was expected of me in the relationship versus maybe what I was able to do. And I remember, we fooled around and it was a lot of an eye-opening experience in terms of sexuality and discovering myself as a sexual being. But I always say the best things that he ever did was introduce me to Japanese food and leave me a virgin. And I was glad for that. But, it wound up ending the way that you might think, which was that he dumped me twice. He dumped me once, we got back together, and he dumped me again. And I remember one night we were out on the front stoop of the dorm building that we lived in, because he lived on the first floor with a mutual friend of ours as a roommate. I lived on the third floor alone. And we're out on this building, the stoop of this building. And he's, I'm trying to talk to the friend who's having a cigarette, and my ex is like, get out of here, go away. Nobody wants to hear what you have to say. And I'm all self-righteous, all 90 pounds of me. It's a free country. I have every right to be out here. And he proceeded to assault me, which sounds worse maybe than it was, but he kicked me in the shin and he slapped my forehead with the back of his hand. He was 6'3" tall. I'm 5'0". You can't tell on Zoom, but I'm super short. So it wasn't really evenly matched. And I wound up going back in. Our mutual friend said, Amy, go get the RA, the person in charge. Just tell her what happened. Go get I'll back you up. Just go get the RA. So I wound up going to the person in charge. I wound up going to the police and getting a protection from abuse order, which is similar to a restraining order. I won it in court. We had an on-campus hearing. He had to move out of the dorm building, no third-party contact. And I haven't seen or heard from him pretty much since then. So it was up to that point, the most traumatic thing. One of the most traumatic things I've been through. But I couldn't believe, that it had ended this way. But it was actually nothing compared to what was coming up next. So at the age of 22, I fell in love for the first time, and I was very scientific about my feelings. I knew I had loved my boyfriend, but I wasn't in love with him. And I met this guy, again, in the worst place you can, which is online on a message board. And he lived in Seattle, Washington, which is all the way across the country from where I was in school in Pennsylvania. And I went out to Seattle in spring break of my senior year of college, and I fell for him even more. And then I moved out there. So I moved all the way to the other side of the country. And I remember sitting in his car, and I decided to tell him that I was in love with him. And I said, Jonathan, I think that I'm in love with you. And his answer was, I know. I don't know if anybody's seen Star Wars, but he was not Han Solo. Okay, maybe he thought he was, I don't know. But in my, having my rose-colored glasses on, I thought, oh, of course he knows me better than I know myself. I didn't have to tell him. He just knew. I didn't have to tell him. And so I had decided that he was who I was going to lose my virginity to. I had had opportunities prior to that, but I knew I wasn't ready. And so before I moved out, I got on the birth control pill, waited the full month you're supposed to wait for the pill to kick in. I asked him to wear a white button-down shirt because I'd always wanted to unbutton a guy's shirt when we were going to make love. I had the bottle of wine picked out. I had the music burned on the CD because this is before MP3s. I was super, super prepared. I even bought a cheerleader uniform because he had said he had a thing for cheerleaders. So I actually started the events of the night naked, and I wound up losing my virginity in a cheerleader uniform, which is weird, but that's how it turned out. But in my attempts to prepare, I thought I was super duper ready, because I thought about it plenty of times, and I'd written about it in my writing. But I was still in that place of low self-esteem and of feeling like if I mess this up, he'll never want to have sex with me again. No one will ever want to have sex with me again. I need some kind of feedback. I need to know if I've done a good job. And I thought at least here in the US, I don't know if this is in other places, but when you eat at a restaurant or you stay at a hotel, they have these cards that you can fill out to talk about what your experience was like. So I created a sexual intercourse comment card. And this is the front of the card, which you can read here. And tongue was slightly in cheek, but I was very, very serious about this. And here are, yes, I see the smiles, very good. And here are some of the questions on the back. What did you enjoy most about this sex session? What do you think could have been better? Please rate the following from 1 to 5. The outfit I had on, pre-intercourse, my facial expressions, my vocal volume. This is very specific stuff here, right? This is super specific. But what I didn't realize at the time, and what I didn't come to realize until later, was that there's a problem with these questions. And the problem with these questions is that there's nothing about my enjoyment. There's nothing about my pleasure. It was all about him. So the idea of my pleasure was secondary if it existed at all. And I think that's true, not just because of being autistic, but just for women in general. We're often socialized to put the needs of others ahead of our own. And so it was certainly true for me here. And but the inevitable was to follow. And the inevitable, oops, oh, what just happened? Oops, sorry about that. My thing just went crazy. Okay, here we go. So the inevitable was to follow, oops, stop doing that, which was that I found out after we'd had intercourse 8 times altogether, 6 months later, that he had a girlfriend he'd forgotten to tell me about, and he was sleeping with half the women in the city of Seattle, Washington. And, you know, all these other girls were calling his girlfriend and saying how great he was in bed, but I was the one who fell in love with him. So I was the easy target. And his girlfriend called me at all hours of the day and night to harass me, threatened to kill me if I didn't leave town, wanted to know all this personal information about my conversations with him. And it was devastating. It was absolutely, and every time the phone would ring, my little Nokia frickin' phone, because this is 2006 we're talking about, I would pick it up hoping it was him saying that he was picking me over her because I was in love. And it still hurts to talk about that, even 15 years later, to remember what that felt like. And that I would have forgiven everything if he just said that he was picking me. That's how bad of a shape I was at that point. But so, and on top of everything else, he sent me an email. I think it was at her request, but it didn't really matter, saying, your first time was the grossest thing I ever did. You were just a retarded whore that I biffed. You meant nothing to me. And as I mentioned before, I met him on a message board, and she went into his account on the message board and posted that email for everybody to read. So this private thing suddenly became a very public 11-page thread that everybody was commenting on, mostly to tell him what a creep he was and how could he do this. But I had never been a target kind of in this way before. It was absolutely gobsmacking. I was devastated, but to this day, I will tell you that what it helped me do is know how to deal with a broken heart, because there was no way I could have known how to handle a broken heart until I had my heart broken, because I know I can survive it now. And experience often is the best teacher in these situations. We want to protect people on the spectrum, but we can't protect people from life and from the world. The world is there. We have to know how to live in it. We have to know how to survive in it. And this is part of that. We should be able to make these mistakes and have these experiences, because it's not fair to deny us simply because of a disability. But so in the midst of all this, I had given him, I couldn't bear to look at the cheerleader uniform anymore. And I'd given him a journal that was monogrammed in an engraved pen, and he returned them outside my building at 6 o'clock in the morning in a bag. And also, when I found all this out, by the way, this is how much of a coward he was. It was all online or on the phone. We never had a face-to-face conversation at all about this. So I took the diary, I took the pen, the uniform, and I went to the side of my building and I set them on fire. And it was this wonderful, spiritual, cathartic moment right up until the fire trucks came, because the alarms went off and I thought I was going to go to jail or get evicted. But luckily I didn't. But so this was when I learned that there are 2 kinds of moving on. And this was the first kind, which is where I had no choice. You know, I remember sitting in the airport in Seattle, because my best friend at the time told me to fly out to New York and stay with her. And I called him one more time and he was like, "We're getting married, get the F out of our lives." And And I was just devastated. And you know, being on the flight and the flight attendant coming to offer me food, and I turned down food twice, and she asked if I was okay, and I just burst into tears. And she took me to the galley and was just so wonderful and comforting. And I still remember that after all these years. But this was, so I had no choice but to kind of find a way to move on, because he was just no longer in my life. But what wound up kind of ultimately happening was that I found this strength inside myself that I didn't know I had. And I think it's a strength that many autistic people have, because as I said, we are trying to exist and thrive in a world that's not made for people like us. And so I remember he sent me a message a few months after the harassment finally ended. And he said, "Sorry for ruining your life." And throughout everything that happened, I had been sad, I had been heartbroken, hurt. But for the first time in that moment, I got angry. It was like clarity. And I got so angry because I thought, how dare you give yourself that much credit? You didn't ruin my life. I'm still here. I'm still here. And so, you know, that was, even though I was still in the midst of all this horrible heartache, that was something that I had never felt before, that clarity. And the way that I knew I had moved on, the second part of moving on was, and I would say it took me about 7 years to fully move past what he did to me, but it was that I developed feelings for someone new, and things ended up not working out with that guy, but I was still okay after. And I didn't think that would be possible. So it was a huge, huge learning experience, as painful and horrific as it was, which it really, really was. But so and when I think about all of that, everything that I went through, and how much it would have helped to have had access to sex education, how much it would have helped to have had information that, you know, maybe it couldn't have stopped me from having my heart broken. Maybe it couldn't have stopped me from going through what I went through, but it might have helped. It might have at least informed me somehow, so I would know how to spot the things that I didn't see. Because when you have rose-colored glasses on, all the flags look red. And even my parents and people 3,000 miles away were saying, "Oh, Amy, I don't know, something doesn't seem right with this guy. Are you sure?" And I just thought, "Oh, you're not here. I'm here. You don't know him. You can't possibly be right." They were absolutely right. They were 100% right. But I had to learn the hard way. And unfortunately, that's been kind of the theme of my life, is learning the hard way. So just very quickly, a couple of strategies for parents for talking about sexuality with your child. Be a safe space for your child, right? So what does that mean? It may be that you might try to have this conversation with your child and they don't necessarily want to talk to you about it. That's actually normal. If you have a 15-year-old kid and they don't want to talk to you, their mother, about sex, what 15-year-old wants to talk to their mother about sex? That's dead normal. That's okay. But what you can do is you can say, "All right, if you don't want to talk about this right now, that's okay. If you want a second opinion, I'm here. I'm here. I'm not embarrassed. You can ask me anything you want." And also that the most powerful thing you can say also is, "I don't know." It's okay to not have the answer. It's okay to say, "I don't know, but let's find out the answer to that question together." I do that in my work even now, because I'm still learning. Everything we know about autism is changing. Everything we know about sexuality changes all the time. So nobody is a true expert, in my opinion. That's why I call myself a specialist rather than an expert, because I feel like expert is a static word that confers with it an authority that can't be challenged. And I don't believe in that. I believe we have so much that we're still learning. So if you express that and let your child know that you're learning too with them, that might make them feel more comfortable to open up and to start to share. And again, discuss issues at an age and maturity appropriate level. So what's that mean? So sometimes with folks on the spectrum, where somebody is chronologically in their age may not match where they are developmentally. So you kind of want to be at this intersection of what does somebody want to know, what are they interested in, and what do they need to know for their age? Because you have to think ahead as well. The things that an autistic child does at 5 that are cute are not so cute when they're 15, and will get them thrown in jail when they're 25. So you always have to be thinking 5, 10 years ahead. What does my child need to know 5 years from now? What do they need to know 10 years from now? So it's about kind of meeting somebody where they're at and marrying that with what do they need to know to keep them safe. And then also remember that no is a complete sentence, right? We oftentimes, when we talk about autism, individuals on the spectrum, we're very focused on compliance and making sure people are where they need to be, when they need to be, they're doing what they need to do. And we forget that it's very important to honor the no when someone says no. Of course, we all have to do things in life we don't want to do. I don't mean that. But when you don't honor somebody's boundaries, it teaches them that their boundaries don't matter. And how this translates into a relationship situation, a dating situation, is that somebody will feel, well, I don't really want to have sex with this guy, but it doesn't matter. So I'll just have sex with him, even though I don't really want to. You have to begin to honor and respect those boundaries from a young age. That starts in childhood, and honoring the no, where and when possible. Because creating somebody who is very compliant can also be dangerous. If you have somebody who's always listening and deferring to authority, then they're not understanding when they shouldn't be listening to someone who claims to be an authority, who may not have their best interest at heart. So it is a safety issue, ultimately, as I had said previously, about the high levels of abuse among people on the spectrum. So for professionals, just a few little strategies. Acknowledge the sexual needs and desires of individuals with autism, right? Again, this sounds super basic, I know, but this is still something that a lot of people have a hard time doing. There's so much taboo around this in many societies all around the world. We just don't want to think of people on the spectrum as having those needs, as having those desires, because it makes us uncomfortable for some reason. Disability and sex don't seem to go together for some reason. And this is all across the disability spectrum, whether it's physical disabilities or developmental disabilities. But to ignore that piece, to cut out that piece of a person, is to deny us part of our humanity and part of the human experience. And it's unfair. And it does a great disservice, I think, to folks on the spectrum, and inherently makes us more vulnerable as well. So also recognize that the effects of puberty and sexuality on autistic people might be greater than, like I said before. We may not always express our emotions and the changes and the things that we're feeling the way that neurotypicals do, but it doesn't mean that we're not feeling those things or going through those things. So we cannot simply, ascribe our neurotypicals can't ascribe their bias, because you guys are the neurotypicals, not me. But you can't use your bias to decide that someone who's autistic isn't experiencing what they're experiencing because it doesn't look the way that you think it should look. It's just so important to always keep that in mind. And then finally, we tend to focus a lot on academic skills, right? On teaching people on the spectrum things that we learn in school, but it's the life skill stuff that is so important. That's the stuff that's going to stay with us for the rest of our lives. It's like a colleague of mine has said, we want to focus on making sure that someone can name all the colors, but then they can't cross the street by themselves. Which of those is more important, right? Someone needs to be able to cross the street by them. The life skills are the things that get lost sometimes, I think, in our urgency to focus on academia. So, and this applies in the workplace as well. Those skills come into play at work, right? Nowhere else do they come into play more, perhaps. So keeping that in mind and keeping in mind that we need to focus on that, I think is crucially important. Remember, as I said before, intimacy is about connection. It is not just about sex. It's not just about romance. It's about the connections that we form with other human beings, whether those are emotional connections, intellectual, or experiential. And the connections that we as people on the spectrum make are a part of everything that we do, right? If we're able to make those connections, how often do you hear, like when it comes to jobs, especially, right? It's not what you know, it's who you know, right? People get jobs all the time because of somebody, that not necessarily because of their skill set, which they should, but because of the connections they're able to make, that networking piece, right? So those connections and intimacy are a thread that runs through our whole lives. And so when we are talking about individuals on the spectrum in the place of employment, we have to remember that this is connected to that happiness that we have the right to feel in relationships, be they friendships or romantic relationships. That connects to our happiness at work as well. So many people we know try to find fulfillment at work, right? People bury themselves in their jobs because they're unhappy maybe in other parts of their lives. It's about achieving that balance. It's about informing the fact that being able to create intimacy will help us be stronger in all areas of life. So that's why we can't neglect this. That's why we have to have these conversations about autism and sexuality, because it's not just about sexuality. It never is. It's about life. We're not teaching people how to have sex. We're teaching people how to live life. And a final thought, and this is a favorite quote of mine, and also remember, like I said, you can't stop life from happening. If you put someone in a bubble so that nothing will ever happen to them, nothing will ever happen to them. But that's not how you ensure that an autistic person will be successful in life and in the world. You have to give people the tools they need to be successful, whether that's at work, whether that's in relationships, whatever it might be. And this is from Frida Kahlo, this quote, al final del día podemos soportar más de lo que creemos, which means at the end of the day, we endure far more than we think we can. And to me, this applies to people on the spectrum. We go through so much. We are resilient, I think, as a result of being in this world that's not made for people like us. We are forced to be resilient. And so people think that if you give someone on the spectrum information about sex, you'll be corrupting their innocence or something like that. And it's simply not true. If you want to protect someone, if you want to keep people on the spectrum safe, empower them, give them information, give us the knowledge we need to succeed and thrive and be part of this world in every way possible. So this is my contact information. I'll leave on here on the screen for a minute. And I'm so grateful and appreciative to all of you for your time and attention today. And now we can go to questions.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Amy. It was amazing. We've received amazing comments from the audience. They also say it's one of the most taboo topic in India's society, which is discussed so easily today. There's one, Anuja saying, hugs, Amy, this is a horrible experience. Thank you for sharing it. Chitra, thank you so much for your comment. You're saying that I'm so glad you're talking about the importance of listening to that no, something which most of the parents don't do. So that's something which we all relate to, we have experienced. So I'm sure this is a great message for all the community members here. Unfortunately, we might not be able to move on with the Q&A, but audience, please reach out to Amy on her contact details on the LinkedIn or Insta, Facebook. Amy is a great supporter. She will be happy to interact with you, answer you any questions, and this also session will be posted recording later on. So feel free to share it among your friends. I'm sure this is such a valid point for all of us, right? And especially the parents who hesitate to bring up this topic among the kids. And we all have faced these this situation in different scenarios. So thank you so much, Amy. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you very much, Archana. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a great rest of the summit.
Thank you. So yeah, without further ado, I would move on to the next segment. We have experience sharing from our colleagues from different organizations. We will start with Thomson Reuters. Sriram, over to you.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Awesome. Okay. So good morning, all. Just a quick update on what we have been doing in the autism spectrum. So I'm Sriram. I am the regional head of HR for India and the Global Ops Centers for Thomson Reuters. And very happy to host this summit in partnership with SAP, J.P.Morgan, and Brainpreneurs. Happy to talk you through about the working with the neurodivergent talent. At Thomson Reuters, and I'm sure people will know, we celebrate all facets of diversity and are committed to creating an inclusive workplace in which everyone can thrive. We can go to the next slide. Autism, so we created an autism internship program, which was initiated in 2020 with around 20 interns. And seeing its success, we rolled out a phase 2 of the program with 12 new interns. And happy to share that we have been able to convert approximately 10 of those into critical contractual roles, basis their performance, feedback from stakeholders, and business requirements. The goal of the program, obviously, is to give neurodiverse individuals a hands-on work experience and provide them with the technical and interpersonal skills, mentorship, and experience to set themselves up for future success. As part of the program, we also wanted to kind of empower people managers to learn more about neurodiversity and the different skills and abilities that individuals on the autism spectrum can bring to workplace. Although we started the program focusing only on a talent on the autism spectrum, we soon decided to widen our scope and included all neurodivergent talent, be it on ADHD, learning disabilities like dyslexia, etc. That's a quick update on the project overview. We'll move on to the next slide. What are the opportunity areas, right? So, reduce social triggers and working from the comforts of homes help the interns to be more productive. And buddy, guardian, intern, and manager together built a system that suits the intern and created an environment conducive for learning and growth. Once the interns got acclimatized to their teams and process, we tried to create a larger exposure, be it internal global events or hackathons. Started seeing participation from interns, and this was all very self-driven by this set of talent. In our experience of working with the interns, we've realized that the sky is the limit. The zeal these individuals have for their work and the urge to learn new skills is unparalleled, and something that I would request all the organizations. I know many organizations which are part of this program today or the sessions have been one of the key players to kind of start this, the kind of employment opportunity. But we hope this sessions will enable other companies also to think through and make a difference in this space. Can we move on to the next slide? Yeah. So what is the way forward? Like I shared earlier, we started with the goal to provide corporate exposure and build employability skills. We did that so by a 6-week employability skills program was conducted for all these interns that we selected prior to the internship commencement itself to help everyone understand and gain certain skills like time management, Microsoft Office, etc. The teams, how to use teams, what happens on a day-to-day schedule from a work perspective. These are not skills that are acquired via college or school education for most of our young talent who may have opted for open schooling predominantly in this spectrum. And in order to be truly inclusive and to give an equal employer opportunity, I think the organization may need to take that extra mile to enable the spectrum talent to be successful in what they do. The next thing that we want to achieve is to be able to co-create solutions for neurodivergent talent. And that's something we are looking forward and making a difference in this particular initiative. Yeah, so finally, I trust many corporates who have joined us today and to listen to our experiences. And I've shared the experience of Thomson Reuters in a quick manner. Are looking forward to working with talent on the spectrum and to assess if this is a plunge that you want to take. If you're still on the fences, I suggest you take that route quickly to come out of the fences and make sure that you plunge into this. Maybe try a pilot internship program to start with, partner with a sector expert to support and guide you. And what is great is that you don't have to reinvent the wheel at all. Today, you will hear 3 different corporates on their journey. So pick and choose the approach that you feel that your organization culture and your vision will enable that to happen. And I only look forward that we need to work together in this space to make this a great success. Reach out to us. We would love to hear, offer any help, and trust. This is a time for us to move forward in this regard. That's all I had, and thanks a lot. Let me hand it over to Brainpreneurs to kind of take it forward and share their experience.
Hello, everyone. So glad to be here. This is Sunena, that I'm sharing, this platform with such wonderful panelists and audience. So just wanted to be sure that I'm audible, right? Okay. So we at Brainpreneurs are on a mission. We strongly believe that every individual in this world has the right to be and be as they are. So for me, Brainpreneurs happened naturally and simply, I must say. It was like something like name it, seed it, and lead it. So, I feel I have been in corporate for over 20 years, and I felt that I graduated from HR leader to a thought leader overnight, because that was the power that I got, from the people, the children who visited our center. So at Brainpreneurs, we aim to set up an inclusive center, and we help individuals, especially children, unleash their potential. And our focus is a lot on holistic development. We can move on to the next slide. The way we are able to achieve this is, I would not now say team of experts, because I heard Amy saying it's very difficult to be, have experts in this field. And I agree with you, Amy, on that. However, having these team of specialists with us has helped us a lot. We have with us clinical psychologists, occupational therapists, speech therapists, even cognitive research scientists and life coach, so that we can give holistic development to children and individuals who visit our center. We can move on to the next slide. We operate through 4 different verticals: our Child Development Center and Experiential Learning Center. We deal with usually with children 2 years to 16 years, and we deal with both neurodiverse and neurotypical children there. And through mental health and well-being, we are taking care of the caregivers. We are ensuring, especially, parents, because parents come with a huge baggage, and there's a lot of information that needs to be shared with them. And through our consulting vertical, all we do is we work closely with various organizations and schools, especially, to help them set up inclusive setups at their places. We can move on to the next slide. So over past 3 years, so we are beginners in this field, but I'm really glad to share that over the last 3 years, we have had around 6,000 successful touch points. We have worked with over 1,500 children. Something that we found is that over these years, we can see 400 plus children who annually had visited us. And, I would say around 55% of them were on the spectrum. And the good part is that we do have children coming in the age group of 2 to 7 years. That means that parents are getting aware and early intervention is being taken care. However, obviously, the not so good news is that we are seeing that there is a huge rise of children who are showing either the symptoms or the features of autism or autism itself. We can move on to the next slide. The way we try to deal, here is we try to do our curriculums and our education beyond activities of daily living. And as, again, we heard Amy talking about teaching life skills and academics together. That is the crux of what we are attempting to do. Early interventions and having our approach on strength-based interventions is helping us a lot. So there's a lot of focus on the strengths rather than, focus on the weaknesses and what a child needs to improve. Of late, I've started a project where we are dealing with mindfulness and children with special needs. And I would love to, this project we have started just, I think, a month back. So we will be seeing the results, but already we are seeing children enjoying the activities, the breathing, and we are doing wonderful ways of improving their focus and attention. There's a lot of focus on pre-vocational and vocational because with children on spectrum, it's important that we help them to get ready for life earlier on. And of course, self-awareness and mental health of caregivers is equally important. So we can move on to the next slide. As I told that I have been working in corporate for more than 20 years. So whenever I'm here with this audience, I feel I belong to this space, and already we heard, and you'll hear more corporates talking about it. So I'm very confident that organizations like SAP, Thomson Reuters, J.P.Morgan, and many others, they will take inclusiveness to the next level. We can move on. So as we feel, it's not that tough, because I have been working in this space, appreciating people on cognitive differences, I think is not that tough. All we need to do that when we are trying to build this kind of a setup, of course, we need executive sponsorship because the intent is very important. When we talk about inclusion, we need to define inclusion and we need to embrace it. We need a multi-pronged approach, and sensitizations and trainings play a very important role. If we can move on to the next slide. We all understand that, and by now there's enough research to support neurodiversity, and it is a competitive advantage for the organizations as well. we all understand the strengths that individuals on spectrum bring in is attention to detail, is being strong on process. So there are a lot of roles that we can carve out in this space. And again, lot of research supports that there is an increase in quality, there is increase in productivity for the organizations. In fact, the teams who have neurodiverse individuals, we have seen an increase in the engagement as well. I can see it happening at my own organization, and I'm sure like you all who have been into it have felt that. We can move on to the next slide. All I need to say that this journey continues. We need to do a lot of work in this space. Webinars like this, having awareness, building awareness around it is very, very important. And of course, later we need awareness to action. So I hope all the people who are listening here, there are lots of ways that we can do in our own space, in our own organizations. Thank you so much. I hand it over to Gaurav.
Thank you so much, and thank you for participating. Welcome again to the India Autism at Work Summit. This is something that some of us have put together to really raise the level of conversation on autism in India. It's a topic that was really not well known a couple of years ago, but we've come a long way since then. And what we try to do here is to help people who are just about getting on the journey with sharing our experiences, helping you understand what are some of the difficulties involved with it, and also what are the joys in supporting the program. When we started along the program, we started off with just understanding the whole landscape across the board. And that aligns well with what autism ultimately is about, which is a spectrum. Now, if you take a look at it across the world, there are about 15% of the global population which is considered to have some level of disability. That as a percentage is inspiring, but it's also a little unnerving to presume that even in this population that we are in the summit right now, there are about 15% of us who have some form of disability or the other. In India, we have a conservative estimate of around 2.2%. We do believe that that number is slightly higher, but it affects really the most workable age of the population, which is around 20 to 59, as you see. Can we go to the next slide, please? Now, in the past, as we've endured and pushed to support people with some form of disability, one of the aspects that we have struggled with, honestly, is helping people to understand what a disability is in the first place, and how do you actually go about creating an inclusive environment? How do you actually go about helping people understand what it means? And that's where support for this conversation actually begins. There are a lot of people from a human perspective who do want to do the right thing, who do want to do what is good. But a lot of folks don't really understand what it means and what are the various gradations and the separations as such of what inclusivity means. One of the ways that we have tried to go about doing it is trying to help understand what a disability means and what it means to truly be inclusive. What does it mean to actually help people get what is rightfully theirs? And there's a term that gets bandied around called reasonable accommodation. Essentially, when someone walks into an organization or someone walks into any kind of an institution and comes up against an impediment to bring their best to work, bring their best to that situation, we look at what's holding them back. We realize what's holding them back. And then we ask ourselves the question, how do you change the environment to let them perform within the constraints of what is considered to be a disability or a restriction for people who are typical and may not just be neurotypical, but generally who are considered so-called normal, right? And that is what reasonable accommodation is about. At a very simple standpoint, if you take a look at it from something all of us could be very familiar with and could connect to, if there is someone who gets out of a car and then reaches for a wheelchair, how do they get up a flight of stairs? You put a ramp. You create an ability for them to ascend using a ramp. And that is a reasonable accommodation. It's not very hard to put together. It's not very hard to provide, but it elevates the individual on the wheelchair. Think about that as a visual. Think about that as something simple that can be done. When you have someone who is neurotypical, this is something that anyone can work through and get around. But when you have someone who's on the autism spectrum, and Amy spoke about some aspects, Shriyaran spoke about some aspects, when an individual comes in on the spectrum, he or she is invariably a little overawed by the number of people. A neurotypical person can walk into an organization and the amount of noise and the activity or the so-called elements of chaos are something that don't affect them. They walk through that, they walk through the clutter, and they'll get on with what they need to do. Someone on the spectrum, however, would be disconcerted. Someone on the spectrum, however, may start getting a little nervous about it. Now, at that stage, if you have an individual who is the so-called buddy step forward and help by taking them across, letting them know that it's okay, letting them know that there is someone or a relationship that they can depend upon, that is a simple, reasonable accommodation that can take things forward. And if as organizations and supporters, we create and provide those tools for individuals, we would be helping a lot more people reach their true potential. Can we go to the next slide, please? We've broken it down into what we call the 4 A's. So if you take these 4 A's and you focus upon these, we found at J.P.Morgan that they truly help people get to the next stage. They truly help people enter the workforce, and they truly help people, again, take their best to the next level. Attitude, accessibility, accommodations, and assimilations, where accommodation is the stage where an environment really allows people to get on with what they need to do and supposedly perform their jobs. Assimilation is the aspect where it is essentially considered normal. In India, unfortunately, when someone walks into a room who isn't considered normal, everyone turns to look at that person. Think about it. You have someone who walks in and has a tic. You have someone who walks into the room and suddenly raises his voice. Invariably, he or she becomes the focus of the room. And that puts that person at a sense of unease. And that makes it difficult for that person to come back to work the next day. However, if you have an assimilative environment, which lets people know that here is a behavior that is going to be expected with this individual because of what he or she is going through, or because he or she is on a spectrum, it becomes something that people are aware of. They form a protective boundary around that individual. And then that individual is able to go and do, again, the best of their achievements. Let's go to the next slide, please. At J.P.Morgan, what we have done is that we've broken this across into multiple areas, right? So we've got what we do across everyone with persons with disability. We focus specifically on mental health awareness. We focus specifically on autism at work, where essentially over the last couple of years, even in the pandemic, we've been able to raise our numbers. And today we have an ability to have people coming in with 40 different roles. And my colleague Jacob will speak a little bit more on that in a moment. We've moved into a virtual world. And in a virtual world like this, where you're on Zoom, if you have an individual who's speaking at a particular pace, or with a particular tone, or with a particular accent, for a couple of folks, it becomes a little difficult to follow the conversation. And then they tune out. A simple aspect that technology provides is closed captioning. It's something that we have introduced across our organization, where if you're on Zoom, there is an ability to turn on live transcript. And this is something that's available in Zoom. If you have it, it's at the bottom of your slide in the menu, and it's on the right-hand side. You turn on live transcript, and it gives you an ability to just read the conversation, just like any one of us would do when you're watching a foreign language film. Some of us may not be very familiar with the various accents and the idioms of English. We may not be able to follow a conversation, but when you can read it, you can actually participate in a meeting. And that simple infusion has allowed people on the spectrum, and even people who are not necessarily on the spectrum, but struggle with the language, to really follow a meeting, participate, and provide their opinion. That's another signal towards inclusivity. Can we go to the next slide, please? Thank you. Ultimately, autism is supposed to be a spectrum, but so is humanity. Ultimately, when someone wants to support anyone on the spectrum, anyone who is a person with disability, they go through these various stages. You've heard about the classical change process where you have your norming, storming, etc. The same thing happens where you have someone who wants to support but just doesn't know how. So as organizations, what we've broken it down into is something like this. You have someone who probably has no clue about what to do, but has this moral urge to support. And how do you help take them from that stage to being an ally, being a fighter, being a supporter, bringing in their opinion, bringing in their talent to truly make this a supportive world? We suggest that everyone get on board, think about what they can do to make this a better world, and think about being that ally for anyone with a disability, and specifically for people on the neurotypical spectrum or a neuroatypical spectrum, in order to help them come in to the work environment. Can we go to the next slide now? And I'll leave this with Jacob, who will speak to you about some of the experiences that we've had in J.P.Morgan, bringing in people on the autism spectrum. Jacob?
Yeah, thanks, Gaurav. So I've been associated with this Autism at Work program at J.P.Morgan for the past 3 years, and we've been able to experience firsthand through hiring manager as well as our own experience the benefits associated with hiring candidates on autism. A few of these which we could relate are being conscientious, committed with high levels of reliability, honesty, and integrity. With their specialized interest and skills and their focused involvement, they eventually do develop as a subject matter expertise. Personally, they find detailing in the work gratifying, and thereby they tend to be persistent. Can we move on to the next slide? So a quick overview of the numbers that we have been able to achieve at J.P.Morgan. Around 235 employees is what we have been able to hire since the pilot launch in 2015. We have a coverage under this program at 9 global locations. And as Gaurav earlier mentioned, 40 plus roles are there in the palette in terms of the different kind of options that the staff on the spectrum can choose. As far as autism awareness trainings are concerned, it's a regular feature, and we have till now covered around 7,300 plus colleagues across J.P.Morgan in this space. The most important benefit that we kind of see out of this program is the high retention. We have experienced 90% retention of among the staff, whoever we have hired till now. Across, we have 25 plus events, which we do every year for on the autism and awareness best practices, and most of which we also share it with other organizations. This is the update that we have from J.P.Morgan perspective. I would like to now hand it over to Kiran from SAP for the business update.
Thank you, Jacob. We're really running short of time. There are many kinds of the facts and figures, people who've been associated.
Kiran, I'm not hearing it very well. I'm not sure it's the same. Yeah, better now.
Is it better? Oh, okay, sorry.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, sorry. So I was saying I have to like really rush because there's not too much time left. So people who've been associated with SAP can relate to these numbers already. So we started in 2013 and are still going very strong with around 200 plus colleagues onboarded locally, globally, with all kinds of employment contracts with us. And we're currently operating in 17 countries and multiple locations in all these countries, so to say. So we've broken the stereotype of certain jobs being able to be the autistic guys being so stereotype for certain kind of jobs. So we've seen them doing around 25 different kind of roles across all board areas at SAP, so which is very encouraging for us. And the way we operate within SAP is we do not have like a dedicated team for autism at work, predominantly barring the central team. So it's mostly volunteer run, who are really passionate and really want to make this difference. And of course, supplemented with expert partners locally and globally as well. So Moving on to opportunities and challenges. So in SAP itself, personally being associated with this program for a number of years, so I've seen how, as an organization, we have grown. So we have embraced neurodiversity and DNI in general. So which only means that the acceptance and opportunities are better than before. So we need to like really make use of that. And then starting from just getting people on board and then figuring out how they can support the organization to really graduate to a level where we are kind of looking at meaningful employment so that it becomes sustainable and it really works for both parties. So that is a phase we are in right now. And we're also fortunate to be in organizations where the policies are like really friendly and support us internally, and also tap into the external support who are always willing to help us in whatever way they possibly could. And the last couple of years, we've really opened up in the virtual setup. So earlier, I must admit that we were also a little skeptical to go beyond Bangalore and Gurgaon, for example, where we have a lot of presence, and then we didn't really know how the virtual setup would work. But now, when we were kind of forced to do it, so we really understood, experienced, and we're really confident that we can actually do that, which only means that it creates additional opportunities for people outside these so-called tier 1 cities and towns. Yeah. So there's also opportunity to make it mainstream, where we don't need these volunteers whom I mentioned about, and it becomes part of your the organization's DNA, and then we don't really talk about it separately, and it just flows into the mainstream, starting from hiring to exit, so to say, right? So this is a journey we are on, and we still have some miles to go. So challenges, nothing new, I would say. So we still face some challenges when it comes to readily fit profiles, right? So which is also, I mean, for a variety of reasons, understandable, given the society we live in, the education system, and the policies, and how the government operates. And also important to note that the ecosystem gaps are also obvious. So we've had this discussion time and again, saying, hey, some schools do make sure that the kids get the basic schooling, but then we also know what the corporates are expecting when they're kind of looking at employing them, but we really are clueless to what to do between that, right? So now there's a lot to be done in the ecosystem side that still stands as a challenge in our perspective. And it's really encouraging the number of organizations we talk to every year and share our experiences and kind of motivate them, if you will, to also start their own journey. But there's still a lot of organizations who are willing to, who understand, who gain the experiences, but still haven't made that real move, so to say, right? So this is probably the forum where we call out on such organizations to actually take the plunge and then make their experiences by themselves. Yeah, so way forward for SAP. So we have like a really strong focus on expansion and sustainability, because initially we made our experiences with bending the rules and doing a lot of stuff to just get this started. But now we're kind of seasoned, well-oiled engine, and we need to make sure that we expand the program in a sustainable way. And bring more of the ecosystem on board. This has been a constant endeavor, and we continue to do that, be it academia, be it other corporates, be it NGOs, parents, whoever, right? So, and we've also gone beyond autism, so to say. We've had a first dyslexia hire this year, and while the dedicated program for autism continues, but we are now opening up for more neurodiverse talent, and also beyond neurodiverse, for that matter. Right, so we've created policies which like are really supporting us to do this, so to say. Yeah, so please reach out to us if you have suggestions, if you need a support in anything, or if you want to onboard and then make this ecosystem better than what it is right now. So I really now would like to hand it over to Archana back and move to the next section. Thank you.
Thank you, Kiran, and thank you all the speakers for sharing your experience and the learnings. I'm sure this will inspire many corporates and the other organizations out there to open up for the neurodiverse hiring. With that, we come to the end of experience sharing, and time to listen to yet another inspiring person, Gopika Kapoor. Gopika is a writer, parent advocate, and an autism consultant. She has written best-selling books, Spiritual Parenting, Spiritual Pregnancy, and has been awarded by FICCI Ladies Organization Women Achiever Award. I'm sure you are waiting to listen to her, so let me not hold you up. Gopika, over to you. Thank you for being here.
Kiran, can I have the first slide, please? Thank you. I want to say thank you to all the organizations involved for inviting me to speak here. I remember attending my first summit, the Autism at Work Summit in 2018. Can we go back to it? Yeah. In 2018, and I met Gaurav there, and I remember coming home and telling my husband, you know what, corporates are hiring people with autism. The future is bright for our son. And all the way to come here to 2021, where I'm a speaker over here. It's been a long journey. Thank you again. I called my presentation Autism Different, Not Less. Those of you who are familiar with the autistic world know that this is something which is a famous quote by Dr. Temple Grandin, who's probably the most famous person with autism who exists in the world. Her mother, she says, her mother used to tell her, you are different, not less. And that is really the belief that governs all the work that I do. And it is the belief that I am so happy to see carry forward with all the corporates who are present here today. Next slide, please. So let me start by introducing you to Sneha. Sneha is 23. She has her own catering business. She loves dancing to Govinda's hit numbers, and she loves cats. And she dislikes numbers ending with 7 and booming loudspeakers. Let's move on. Let's meet Rahul. Rahul is 25. He works as a software coder. He loves cars and he loves collecting bottle caps. And he dislikes insects, popping balloons, pressure cookers, and tags on clothes. Now, both Sneha and Rahul have autism. Sneha and Rahul are representative of so many people who you will meet who are on the spectrum. Next slide, please. We know what autism is. All of you present here know what it is. It's a lifelong neurodevelopment condition. It affects how people perceive the world. Let's move on. I think everybody here is very well versed. The idea is that autism is a spectrum, and so Sneha, Rahul, and thousands of other people who we encounter are on the spectrum. In India, Gaurav shared some numbers. Kiran, yeah. So the prevalence figures that I was reading about is that 1 in 10 children below the age of 10 years are diagnosed on the spectrum. When you extrapolate this with the population, it comes to more than 2 million. These are the statistics that have been released in a study that was conducted in 2019. Experts say that it could be anything as much as 3 times this figure. So this is what we know. Okay, next slide. Okay, just a minute. Okay, so if you can use your chat boxes and please tell me where do you think the term autism originated. Kiran, please don't change the slide. So you can use your chat boxes and type in your chat the responses to this. Anybody, please go ahead. Greek, says Swati. India autism is renamed as Goldism. Okay, Indian, Greek. Yeah, anyone else? Greek or India? Indian, Greek. Wow, lots of people, India, Greek. Nowhere else. Indian. Okay, Kiran, can we have the answer? Can you click, please? Latin, perhaps. Yes, it was in Greece. The term autism comes from the term autos. Autos means within oneself, and this is where the term originated. Okay, let's move on. Okay, so just a little bit about me. Just Kiran, just a minute. So just a minute. Yeah, the first one. Yeah, thank you. I have 2 children. They are almost 17 years old. They're twins. My son Veer is on the spectrum, and that is how I entered into this whole world of autism. Next one. Yeah. Okay. I then subsequently wanted to do something to make a change, and so I started working with an organization called Ummi Child Development Center based in Mumbai. I worked there for 10 years. I rose from being junior therapist and just starting to work with kids to working on various, next slide, on various trainings, which covered all sorts of topics from how to communicate with your child, to behaviors, to play, to managing puberty issues. Next slide. Subsequently worked on the WHO Caregiver Skill Training Program, which we piloted at UMI, and I was coordinating that program. Next slide. In 2019, an article came out in the Bangalore Mirror and the Mumbai Mirror featuring me and my son. And this article talked about our journey. And this really propelled me to become an advocate and to work to really amplify autism all over. Next one. Subsequently, I wrote an article which really got me into the space of diversity and inclusion and working on hiring. And I really am so happy to see so many corporates over here in this space. Next slide. So what am I passionate about and what am I going to talk to you about? J.P.Morgan Chase talked about this a little bit. I'm going to talk on this as well. Next slide. What is the neurodiversity advantage? Focused thinking. This is something I was exposed to very early on when I would sit and watch my son do a puzzle. He would be sitting from morning to evening and it would be a 1,000-piece puzzle, and almost 700 pieces of that would be something like a sky or leaves. He would piece together these little pieces and be so completely focused and would not move until he'd finished that puzzle. This focused thinking is a tremendous advantage when it comes to neurodiverse individuals. Next point. Expert knowledge, as we know, a lot of people who are neurodiverse have expert knowledge which corporates can use to really help them in those specific areas. Loyalty and honesty. We know that people on the spectrum do not like transitions. This is something which, if you hire somebody on the spectrum, they are likely to stay with you for a long time. Honesty, again, is something which is a trademark with individuals with autism. In fact, as a therapist, when we used to play games with kids, if a child cheated, it would actually be an occasion for celebration with the parents, because not knowing how to lie, being extremely honest is something which is definitely an advantage when it comes to people on the spectrum. It can also be, like Amy talked about earlier, something which makes people take advantage of them, but we view it as an advantage when it comes to hiring people who are neurodiverse. Next point. Technical abilities, as all of you who have hired people on the spectrum know, specifically in areas such as IT, they have extremely strong technical abilities. Next point. Again, detailed factual knowledge and an excellent memory. Memory is something which those of you who are parents over here will definitely vouch for, as well as those of you who have hired people and who work with people who are neurodiverse know that their memory is really superb. Next point. Okay. Ultimately, I remember attending the first Autism at Work Summit, which was hosted by J.P.Morgan Chase. And I remember Gaurav saying, you know, we're not doing this for charity. We're doing it because it makes financial sense. And that is so true. Next point. So these are, you must be knowing this as well, that in the UK, when SAP hired neurodiverse employees to help, when they were hired to fix this technical problem, they got a saving of 40 million in savings. Next point. Saving of, again, 800 hours in a project at Ernst & Young, and a cost saving of £73,000, which is a huge amount. The next one. So when you want to hire somebody on the spectrum, like with a meal, when you need to prepare a meal, there is preparation is key. Similarly, you need to prepare to hire people on the spectrum. Next point. Next one. So let's look at the key players when it comes to corporate hiring. You have the organizations and you have families. So I've broken this up into 2 points, and we look at each entity in this sense. Go ahead. Okay, when we talk about, just a minute, Kiran, can you just go back, please? Thank you. So when we talk about, next slide. When it comes to hiring on the spectrum, we talk about diversity, we talk about inclusion, and we talk about belonging. What is diversity? Next point. So when we talk about diversity, we are talking about hiring autistic individuals for specific roles. Kiran talked about not having standardized roles when it comes to hiring. There are specific roles which people with autism can be hired for, and these could include accounting, it includes IT, it could be any sort of software. They could also be, someone had mentioned on the chat that when you are looking to hire people on the spectrum, look at catering, look at housekeeping, look at support staff. These are all roles for which people can be hired for. Next point. When we talk about inclusion, it's in terms of changing policies and structures. In the question, somebody has asked, what are the accommodations? We all talked about reasonable accommodations. What are those accommodations that you have to look at when it comes to hiring people on the spectrum? These could be changing the way you put out job advertisements. When you put out a job advert which advertises someone with the requirement to be an excellent communicator, someone to be a team player, and you're hiring for somebody in accounts, do you really need them to be an excellent communicator if their job has to be tallying numbers? You need them to be a team player when they have to code. These are things which we know people with autism find difficult. And so we need to re-look at whether these skills are necessary for people to be hired. When it comes to the interview process, is something which a lot of people with autism find very difficult. When you're faced with a panel, it's something which a lot of people get unnerved by, right? Today we are all talking on Zoom. I'm looking at a camera, but maybe the panelist who's spoken before me would find it unnerving to talk to a whole audience. Similarly, when we're faced with an interview panel, we have a bunch of people sitting in front of us and firing questions at us, rethinking interviews, having interviews where the person on the spectrum meets with one person after the other with breaks in between, and looking at that as a preferred interview model would be something which would help them bring out their best, as would demonstration versus description. We know a lot of people with autism struggle with communication, but when they have to demonstrate their skills, it's so much easier for them. Changing the structure of offices, changing the way seating is done. When we talk about reasonable accommodations, it comes to changing things like changing lighting, replacing LEDs with tube lights which flicker, which we know is difficult for a lot of people. Simply looking at how seating is arranged in the workspace and not seating somebody who's on the spectrum in an open area, having fixed desks versus floating desks, which is often the norm once people get back to work. These are all simple things that can be used to change how people with autism work in the workspace. I remember reading this article where just changing the floor cleaner improved productivity amongst neurodiverse employees, because the floor cleaner had a very heavy floral scent, and this made it impossible for people on the spectrum to concentrate. They changed it to a neutral cleaner and productivity went up tremendously. So these are small accommodations, and honestly, a lot of these accommodations would help neurotypical people as well. So when you use visuals in the workplace, for example, or create a sheet which gives which is used to help neurodiverse employees plan their work week by setting targets and creating structured documentation of what they have to do, when they have to do it by, and when they have to submit it by, it would help everybody, right? I'm sure I could work with something like that. I have a to-do list. Now that's my reasonable accommodation that I'm using. It's a visual which I'm using to help myself. I've written down points over here which people have talked about, and I've written reasonable accommodation, Gaurav, because he talked about this. This is my visual schedule, my visual cue to myself that I need to talk about that. So this is really something which would help not just neurodiverse employees, but people across the board. But ultimately, changing the floor cleaner and using a few visuals is only, I think, the icing on the cake. Next one. What it ultimately comes to is a sense of belonging. And this means changing organization culture. It is all very well to hire a few people who are on the spectrum and say, okay, come and join our organization, and here's what we're going to do. But if it really needs to work, as I know that all of you who have hired neurodiverse employees have experienced, when you, like Gaurav mentioned, they are not here because you're doing them a favor. You're here because they're adding definitely to the organization. And so changing the culture of the organization, right from the CEO to the housekeeping staff, where everybody is on board with this, is something which is very, very important. We talked about attitude. Gaurav talked about the 4 A's, and attitude is ultimately what is going to make a difference. Attitude of everybody who is on board with this, to say that, look, we are here to not just accommodate you, but to include you and to get you to belong, because you are adding to us, is what is going to make a difference. Next slide. And so I thought I would bring this in because when it just at the surface is the language of neurodiversity and how language makes such an important part. So when we say something like the disabled, instead using something like disabled person, special needs, description of specific needs. High and low functioning are terms that I have a lot of problems with, because it talks about when you assume that somebody is high functioning, you assume that they don't need any support whatsoever. A lot of people in the corporate space are what we call high functioning. And so it's assumed that when someone is high functioning, they're not going to need any support because they'll manage. Amy talked about the fact that, you know, people with autism, they don't need to, young people with autism don't need to get asked about, you know, what is going on with them. It does not mean that if just because you have a software engineer who's working with you, who's neurodiverse and is absolutely brilliant at their work, that they may not need support and help. So that is something which is really important. Instead, we talk about specific strengths and challenges. Normal is a word I absolutely hate because I'm not normal. Nobody is normal. When you talk about normal, you talk about the fact that anybody who is not normal is abnormal. And how awful is that? So again, neurotypical, neurodiverse are words which are so beautiful. The whole neurodiversity movement talks about the fact that we all have brains which are different. And it is as integral to humankind as is biodiversity. We talk about biodiversity in terms of, you know, having a variety of life forms. Why not have, we all have a variety of brains, and that is as important to this spectrum of humankind as is biodiversity. And that is something which so please, all of you over here, please do not use the word normal anymore. Please switch to neurotypical. Abnormal, again, like I said, neurodiverse, autistic. A lot of people who are on the spectrum, who are autistic, have their preferred ways of addressing, of being addressed. And I was asked this question once when I was doing a corporate presentation: what should we do? How should we ask? How should we address people who are on the spectrum? And my answer was simple: ask them. Ask them how they want to be addressed. Do they want to be referred to as being on the spectrum? Do they want to be referred to as a person with autism? Do they want to be referred to as autistic? They are the ones who will tell you. They are the ones whose voices need to be heard. And they are the ones who will tell you how they want to be addressed. Because with that comes respect. A lot of times when we have people who are different in any way, we forget this very important thing called respect. And respect is something which is extremely important. No matter whether you have a disability or not, no matter who you are, respect is really important. Suffering from is, again, the most awful term. It goes right up there with normal in a sense of a term that I hate. I remember when my son's first disability certificate was given, it said, Veer Kapoor is suffering from autism. I was looking at him. He's smiling, he's laughing. He did not seem to be suffering from anything, according to me. So suffering from is, again, a term which must not be used at all. Has is so much more reasonable. Treatment. This is not a disease. Neurodiversity is not a disease. And so people with neurodiversity do not have to be treated for anything. I am not neurodiverse myself, but I really feel that as a parent advocate, I need to speak up for at least a few people who are neurodiverse. Pranav is going to be talking himself, who is extremely articulate and who's going to be talking himself about as a neurodiverse person. But Pranav will agree that he does not need any treatment. Services, yes. Services are things which help people. Services have to be given for support, and we all need services. So my glasses, I can't see without my glasses. These are the services I need, right? And so services are things which support people. They are supports which people need to help people. Next slide, please. Companies who invested in autistic talent, J.P.Morgan and Chase and Company and SAP, you're right up there. Here are other companies who have helped hired people on the spectrum, and kudos to you. Let's have more names up there in the next summit. I hope this entire summit inspires more people to hire neurodiverse talent. Next slide, please. Okay, quiz time again. Kiran, please don't press anything yet. Okay, which country has the highest rate of diagnosis of autism? Please use the chat box. UK, Japan, US, UK, US. Okay, predominantly UK and US. Okay, sorry. Okay, can we click that? Sorry for pointing that out. It's Hong Kong, surprisingly. Hong Kong has the highest rate of diagnosis of autism. A lot of people feel that there is an epidemic of autism out there. That's one of the myths that people have. Honestly, there is no autism epidemic. I think we are just able to diagnose. There is more awareness. And so people with autism really have the kind of support. Amy said she was diagnosed when she was 11. My son was diagnosed when he was 3. When kids get diagnosed younger, they are able to access support, they're able to access services, they're able to access care, which makes their life easier. And it makes it so much easier for their parents, it makes it so much easier for them, it makes it easier for the support systems and the community at large. And really that is what early intervention and early diagnosis helps in. Next point. So we talked about the corporate aspect. Now let's talk about the families, because really when you hire on the spectrum, it becomes a family affair. So within this, there are 3 key kind of aspects. Kiran, there's family, there's education, and there's community. And Kiran talked about the gap. And so I'm going to try and talk a little bit about that. Okay, next slide. Okay. So when it comes to the family, we have quite a few families over here. The first thing I would say is observe your child. Really figure out what your child's interests are. I want to share with you a little something which happened with my family 2 weeks ago. We went and met our developmental pediatrician, and we were trying to figure out options for vocational career for my son Veer, who is now going to be 17. And he loves baking. And so we were thinking about baking, we were thinking about coding and software. And I happened to mention to her that he really enjoys doing origami. And he really enjoys, like I mentioned earlier, doing puzzles. And she said, you know, he is so visual. He really enjoys these puzzles. He's enjoying his origami. He's enjoying things which are visual. Maybe you should consider software and coding. This is something which comes from observing what your child likes. When your child really likes something, they are going to be motivated to do that. We know that a lot of children who are on the spectrum have specific interests. And when we observe those interests and work towards those, that is what we can, it gives us an indication of what our child likes, what our child is interested in, because that is what they're going to excel in. So please do that. Reduce the pressure. It reduces the pressure that children face. Amy talked about, again, life skills versus academic skills. Yes, if the child is academically oriented, by all means encourage them in that direction. But if they are not academically oriented, please recognize that and please reduce the pressure. Don't force them to work on their academics. Academics are only one aspect of it. By doing a PhD or passing their 12th standard or passing their BA, it is really not, those academic skills have to be combined with life skills for them to be able to succeed in the world. They are not living in a textbook, they are living in the world. So please, please do not focus only on academics. Teach daily living skills. When I talk about daily living skills, I'm talking about can they dress themselves? Can they look after themselves? Do they know how to brush their teeth independently? Do they know how to fix themselves a sandwich? Can they make their own tea or coffee? These are daily living skills which are important. Functional skills. Do they know the value of money? Can they go to a shop, pay 500 rupees and get the right change back and not get gypped by shopkeepers? Can they manage time? Do they know what time it is in digital and analog? These are important skills to remember. Can they set a timer? Can they manage to log on to a computer? We've had almost 2 years of digital education, on online education. How many kids have been able to log on to Zoom and do their Zoom online classes by themselves? These are really important skills to teach. Functional skills are about time management, money management, soft skills and ancillary skills. Again, when we are getting kids ready for employment, do they know how to dress? A lot of people, these are very, what may seem like small things, but how many of us have had colleagues who have body odor? It's a small skill, but do our kids know that they have to use deodorant? Do our kids know that they have to brush their teeth before they go to work? Do our kids know that their shirt has to be tucked into their pants and that it doesn't have to be left out? Do our kids know how to get to work? Do they know how to be able to take a bus, a train, a taxi? These are skills, because when it comes to employability, they need to be able to get to the office. Do they know how to write emails? Do they know who to address the emails to? Do they know how the difference between addressing a boss, addressing a colleague? Do they know these things? These are skills which need to be taught. And how do we teach them? We teach them by example. We teach them by modeling. We teach them through stories. We teach them through exposure. I remember when my son was young and I would take him for therapy. The one thing that all his therapists told me, and that I subsequently told the families that I worked with, was exposure, exposure, exposure. Let them go to McDonald's and buy their own burgers. It doesn't matter whether they are verbal or non-verbal. They will have a system. They can use cards. They can use, their apps. They can use any sort of means of communication. Let them go and do this themselves. Let them go to the Kinara store and buy their own, groceries. Give them shopping lists. Teach them how to use the ATM to withdraw money. Take them on public transport. Teach them how to use the train. Teach them how to use the bus and the taxi. These are things which are extremely important. Yes, it is very important maybe for them to get 90 on 100 in the maths exam, but more important is it for them to go and to be able to use buses, taxis by themselves, to withdraw money by themselves, and to learn how to manage time. These are extremely, extremely important skills, and this is what is going to make them employable. Whether it is in a factory, whether it is in a cafe, whether it is in a garden center or a nursery, or whether it is at SAP or J.P.Morgan Chase or any other corporate that is going to employ them. So these are skills which families need to work on. Next slide, please. Education. Again, when families choose a school or a college, remember to choose a supportive school and college. I remember hearing this one mom who I had spoken to a while back, who said, I chose a small school, but a supportive school, which let my son stay there and work with him. So it wasn't a big, fancy, prestigious school. It was a school which really supported her son and helped him to deal with whatever he was dealing with, and where all the kids were a part of it, all the teachers were part of it. Concessions are very, very important to help our children. They are the support system. And a lot of parents feel, oh, my child is so smart, they don't need concessions. But don't we all need support? Like I mentioned, I wear glasses. These are my supports. If I don't have my glasses, I won't be able to read what is written on this computer. Do I feel ashamed about wearing glasses? No. Somebody who has a problem with walking needs a stick, but they would not be able to walk without the stick. Similarly, they need concessions to be able to work, to be able to be their best selves. So help them be their best selves by availing of these concessions. There are a lot of great programs. I know Umeed, just because I work there, runs fabulous programs on what the concessions are available. It's called a Know Your Rights workshop. Parents who have not registered for that, please go to the Umeed's page and register for the workshop, because it's very, very important to know what rights our children have and what rights we as families have. Explore vocational courses. The government is really pushing hard for vocational courses. And when my son was younger, the term vocational meant candle making and sewing bags and things like that. There is nothing wrong with that, but there is a whole realm of vocational courses which are out there. And please explore them. It could be anything that your child could do and is interested in, and it would really give them dignity and respect. And it's very important to explore these vocational courses and see what is out there, what is on offer, and to help your child explore themselves, explore their career through these vocational courses. Socialization, Amy talked about that as well. Socialization is extremely important. It's not what you do, it's who you know. And this is something which is really important for them to have a group. It's not going to be only about academics. It's not going to be about them sitting at a desk and typing out figures or doing accounts or doing code. It's about socialization. Find 1, 2, 3 people who they can socialize with. They don't have to be of the same age. They don't have to be of the same type of people as you are. They need to socialize, and that's very, very important. And as parents, this is something which we need to encourage. Decide goals. So just to share my example, in my mind, my goal was that I need my son to complete his 10th grade education. My goal is not for him to score 90%. He just needs to complete 10th grade. When I look at the curriculum for 12th grade, I feel, okay, this is not something I necessarily need him to complete. What is my goal? My goal is for him to be gainfully employed. My goal is for him to be healthy. My goal is for him to have a group of friends. It could be just 2 people maybe, whom he can hang out with on the weekends. My goal is for him to be physically healthy. What is your goal for your child? Really write this down, think about it, and decide what it is. Your goal, when you are deciding your goal, it has to be a SMART goal. It has to be specific. It has to be manageable. It has to be achievable and realistic. And this is something which you have to look at and decide as a family. Make your child a part of this. My son for so long was talking about how he wanted to be a baker, a computer engineer, and a model like Pranav. He wants to be a model like you. And so these are his goals. I need to take these into account. I can't tell him I want you to be an accountant just because that's what I want. So you have to involve your child in this. Let them be a part of this. Let them articulate it to you in whatever way that they can. They all will have hopes and dreams. But how many of us have taken the time to really make them a part of this conversation? We can't look at this without them. And so we really need to make them a part of this conversation and define goals for ourselves as a family. Next slide, please. Community. Again, the community, we have to create a village, create your support systems, create the systems that will help you achieve this goal. You are not the only one who's going to be on this path. You need to create your support systems. Encourage participation. I talked about exposure. Encourage as much participation in everything that your child can. When it comes to art competitions, dance competitions, whatever it is, get your child to participate. Network. Create opportunities where your child can be a part of various things. And above all, for a lot of us, our kids cannot advocate for themselves. As a parent, we need to advocate for them. We need to really help them get out in the world and be a part of it. Next slide. That is, I'll come to the end of this. My details, my book is called Beyond the Blue. And please, you can buy it on Amazon, on Flipkart, and those are where you can find me. Thank you so much. If you have any questions, please do let me know.
Thank you so much, Gopika. It was so amazing and so relating to what you spoke about. I have to quote an example here of our employee in the company who joined us through Autism program. When he joined, we had to teach him a lot of things. I mean, we started doing this advocacy with the parents back then, saying that why don't you start this at home? Then it makes it much easier for a corporate to observe these talents. When he joined, we had to remind him on everything, to come to office at 9 in the morning, even to sleep, get his 8 hours sleep in the night, because he would end up playing video games and call up in the morning and say that, hey, I played video game the whole morning and I can't come to office. That's being black and white with them, right? But I'm so proud to say today, after 5-6 years of journey with SAP, he is happily married, settled, has a kid, and lives an independent life. That's something which is really, heart-touching for us. And I've been quoting this example to many, many, many groups. That is the difference we want to make here. Make them a strong, independent, who can lead a better life for themselves. So thank you so much, Gopika. Lovely, amazing comments we're receiving. I'm sure people will reach out to you on LinkedIn and other social media handles of yours to get in touch with you and get more advocacy on this topic. Thank you once again. Now, we save the best for the last. So the fun session with Pranav Bakshi. We all are waiting to, talk to him and know him and learn about him more. So he's India's first mainstream model with autism. He has walked the ramp for US POLO and Benettion and also featured for FBB and is now an intern with Thomson Reuters. I would like to hand over this segment to my colleague, Stanika, who's from Brainpreneurs. Stanika, over to you and Pranav.
Thank you so much, Archana. Hi, Pranav, how are you? Hello, Pranav, are you there with us?
Yes, I'm there.
Hi, how are you?
I'm fine, Sanika.
So Pranav, it is really impressive to see how far you've come. Please tell us something more about your modeling journey.
I was introduced to modeling as an activity in 2016 when I went for Art for Autism Festival. When I came back, I saw models walking on the ramp on a big screen in a mall, and I wanted to be like them. I clicked pictures of the billboards and I sent them to my mom. And I said to mom that I wanted to be like them. Mom said to me that it's very difficult and you have to work very hard. And I said, I will. I feel glad when I get assignments. In case if I don't get selected, I wish I could do it next time. I like to pose in front of the camera and I like to walk the ramp when amazing music plays.
That is so nice to hear, Pranav. And what would you say about your biggest strengths?
I work very hard and I don't give up. I know how to sort my challenges. If I face anxieties, I write in my anxiety journal or I discuss things with my mom. The problem gets sorted. We don't suffer from autism. It's my superpower.
Thanks a lot, Pranav, for sharing that. And I hope we all learn something from this thing, that we should not give up and work hard and try again to succeed. Okay, Pranav, one more question that I have for you is that we all look up for something when we want to get motivation. So is there a book, a movie, or any song that motivates you a lot?
My quote is, work hard, play hard. I work hard on weekdays and I enjoy on weekends. I don't read many books, but I like Matilda. Fred is a good friend of Matilda. And also Miss Honey is also a good friend of Matilda. But I don't like Matilda's parents because they were being mean to her and not nice to her.
Okay.
And my favorite Hindi movie is Dil Chahta Hai. And it was released in Flashback Past of 2001, 10 August. And it was shot in 3 cities, Mumbai, Goa, and Sydney. And these are my favorite cities. And I like to enjoy the road trip from Mumbai to Goa and also visit my sister in Sydney. Also, my favorite song is Nikita by Elton John. He's from United Kingdom and it was released in 1985. Like my sister's name is Nikita and I love her the most in the whole wide world.
That's so sweet. This is a classic example of memory that I think Gopika ma'am was talking about, how sharp the memory can be in people who have autism. Pranav, what are your other interests?
I like to do fitness. I wake up and do exercises early in the morning. I like to listen to 94.3 Radio 1 all the time. I only like to travel to Bangalore and Mumbai because 94.3 Radio 1 plays. I like to attend music concerts, but I miss attending concerts due to COVID-19. And when COVID-19 gets finished, I'll attend music concerts. I like to click pictures. I like to click pictures in series. My favorite series are Silhouette series, Cloud series, Flower series, Water series, and Aeroplane series. I like to write. I'm a guest columnist with Newshook EMAC. I'm writing flashback story of my life. It starts in 2000 when I was born. I love Mumbai.
Wow, that's quite a lot of talents, Pranav, you have. Okay, so I have also heard that you are interested in mimicry and you might have something prepared for us today.
Yeah.
Okay, so please go ahead.
I like to mimic Mr. B, and I'm going to show you. Hello, I'm B. And I like to mimic Dexter's sad expression. That's it.
Oh my God, that was really cute. Thank you so much, Pranav. Now we also have a small quiz prepared for you. So are you ready for that?
Yes, Anika, I'm ready.
Okay, so Pranav has excellent memory of songs, and so we have chosen some songs in recent from 2020, 2019, and 2021, and I'll be asking those songs, and Pranav has to answer who has sung that song, and maybe some other details if he remembers that. Okay, Pranav, the first song is "Bad Habits."
Bad Habits is sung by Ed Sheeran. He's from United Kingdom and it was released in 2021.
Okay. The second song is Levitating.
And by Dua Lipa and also Missy Elliott and Madonna. And Madonna is from US and Missy Elliott is from US and Dua Lipa is from United Kingdom and it was released in Flashback Past of 2020.
Anybody wants to cross-check this? According to my data, it's completely correct. Okay, next song is Senorita.
Shawn Mendes and Camila Cabello, and it was released in 2019. And Shawn Mendes is from Canada, and Camila Cabello is from Cuba.
Okay, now this one is a difficult one. It's called Overpass Graffiti. It's a very recent song, Overpass Graffiti.
I'm confused. Name the singer.
Okay, it's by Ed Sheeran. If I would have told you, might have
think it's by Ed Sheeran. He's from United Kingdom and it was released in 2021. And also Ed Sheeran also sang Shivers.
Yes, perfect. Okay. Next song is Red.
And Red by Taylor Swift. And she's from US and it was released in Flashback Past of 2012. And she also played that song. I knew you were trouble with me, and it's with the studio album Red.
Yes, okay. Takeaway.
By the Chainsmokers and Elanium feature Lennon Stella as released with Retrovision remix for 94.3 Radio 1 Megamix.
That is great. Okay, what about Believer?
Imagine Dragons. And it was released in 2017 and Imagine Dragons is from Las Vegas, Nevada, United States.
All right. Okay, another song, My Universe.
By Coldplay x BTS. And Coldplay is from United Kingdom. And BTS is from Seoul, South Korea. And it was released in 2021.
Yes, okay. Dance Monkey.
Tones and I. and it's from Australia.
Perfect. All right. I think I'll go for the last
Released in
song.
2021.
Okay. I'll go for the last song now. Cloud number 9.
Bryan Adams, and he's from Canada.
Perfect.
And released in 1987. Sorry, 1985.
Okay. Thank you so much, Pranav. Archana, over to
Welcome,
you.
Sanika.
Thank you so much, Sanika. Thank you so much, Pranav. By the way, you should know Coldplay is now one of
Welcome.
the ambassador for SAP. They are promoting one of our products, so they are our brand ambassadors. Maybe you will get to meet them one day. And I'm seeing lovely comments. We have got people are saying, "Forget Google, Pranav is the new Google." So amazing, and thank you so much, everyone, for joining. And special thanks to all our speakers, Amy, Gopika, Pranav. You guys were amazingly inspiring. Very relatable points, what you spoke today. Thank you so much for being with us today. We will soon share this on social media so that many people can watch out and get inspired. Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Are we off now?